This is a conversation, this is a dialogue, this is not a debate. And what we're trying to do is trying to ask ourselves this fundamental question: in what way technology affects or impacts the nature of a being, human being? And that's what we want to do. And I would like to say that, we know from Neanderthals, we ended up becoming Anthropocene, and from Anthropocene will lead us to cyborg, and will AI, artificial intelligence, take us there, so our destination. So that is something. So we want to interrogate today the existential realities of the human person. And I'm very grateful that Professor Ronald Factum kind of, this all, by the way, began few months ago when, in our occasional philosophical banters we do, we pass to his office and we spend half an hour sometimes just bantering about philosophy. And I know he's a aficionado of Heidegger. He has read and almost everything Heidegger has written, and he is the right place for us, the right position for us to kind of give us the gist of Heidegger and technology and being. So I would like to ask Professor to please join us and introduce us.
Well, thank you, Basilio. The question that you posed, what might Heidegger say about ChatGPT? And so this is a philosophical talk, a Heidegger-related talk, not a technical talk. So if there are computer science people apparently in my division who may be listening or elsewhere, this is a very philosophically oriented talk, but there may be some light shed relating to ChatGPT. Okay, well, in the time of Socrates, an oracle, the oracle of Apollo at Delphi, spoke forth prophecy and truth to the ancient world. Will ChatGPT or its successors become our 21st century oracle of truth? And what kind of truth will be spoken? Surely we hope to hear something more original from ChatGPT than an interesting rehash of what we have already essentially programmed into it. But I would like to ask a broader question. Have we today actually lost the ability to encounter, experience, or reach agreement on truth? Has truth, not truth as our possession, not merely as the correctness of our judgments, but rather truth as what comes forward independently of itself and takes possession of us? Has truth in this sense somehow been drowned out in our cybercentric world? Has truth been reduced to mere subjective point of view? Is Heidegger's reversion to truth as aletheia, which translates as unhiddenness or unconcealment, and derives from the pre-Socratic philosophers Parmenides and Heraclitus, is aletheia an archaic throwback to a primitive concept without relevance to our modern age? The internet age in its entirety, the internet age, can be seen as both included within and a natural evolution from what Heidegger calls the age of the world picture. This is the age rooted in Descartes' metaphysics, characterized by a certain kind of seeing based on what Heidegger calls the mathematical projection of reality. A very simple example of a mathematical projection, and it relates back to Descartes, is the Cartesian coordinate system. Once you have learned the Cartesian coordinate system in school, your experience of a plane is different. Likewise with three-dimensional coordinates, affecting our experience of space. So these are very simple examples of projections that we're all familiar with. A projections like these can affect how we experience the world. Now, I would liken the mathematical projection that Heidegger is talking about in the age of the world picture, just to give a broad analogy, would be something like a world-encompassing metaphysical grid, something like a fishing net, made up of assumptions, anticipations, concepts, theories, and laws, a net in which only what is caught can be in being. And what is caught, where what is caught is thereby objectified, fixed, immobilized, interpreted, and placed at our disposal as facts or information. One sign that an object or event is caught in this net, it loses its ability to provoke wonder. If ChatGPT evokes wonder right now, I think that wonder will be short-lived. ChatGPT is the perfect example of a modern-day oracle, in the sense that, in one way or another, what it returns to us, disguised though it may be, is what we have already planted in the world. It represents our own mathematical projection reflected back to us. A phenomenologist today would be fascinated by how we are constantly looking at screens. Modern seeing abhors hiddenness. It tries to bring out into the open and into our sights every hidden corner, every nook and cranny of reality. Absolutely everything imaginable, including we ourselves, must be brought out into the open and objectified. Contrast our modern penchant for bringing ourselves out into the open on the internet. I'm thinking of Facebook, for example. Contrast this modern penchant with the ancient Epicurean admonition to, quote, live in hiding. We seem obsessed with searching things out and making them visible. Just as nature abhors a vacuum, our kind of seeing abhors hiddenness. But in our relentless objectification, representation, and setting of all things in our sights, in our modern assault on hiddenness, truth as what comes forward of itself, that which is not prompted by our looking, is obscured. According to Heidegger, what comes forward of itself in truth must emerge, or rather be in the process of emerging, from hiddenness. Paradoxically, what emerges from hiddenness requires hiddenness in order to appear. Everything that comes into appearance and is in being is determined both by unhiddenness and by hiddenness at the same time. To the extent that we everywhere try to eliminate what could remain hidden, we are blocking our native ability to experience truth. And at the same time, we are blocking an experience of being, which Heidegger describes as presencing. Here is a key example. The human way of presencing is steeped in hiddenness. How can we experience one another as human unless we allow each other to at least partially remain concealed? To the extent that we treat one another as objects, we are refusing to acknowledge each person's inherent concealment as human. To be human is always to remain partially hidden. In the age of the world picture, Heidegger elaborates on how our modern way of seeing is rooted in Descartes' metaphysics. He claims that human beings themselves have changed in a profound way in the post-Cartesian period. The essential change is that, as he puts it, man becomes subject. What does he mean by this? The word subject, the Latin subjectum, comes from the Greek hupokemenon, used by Aristotle to mean that which lies underneath, that which lies present of itself and endures, the substrate, the ground. In its metaphysical meaning, the concept of subject, the hupokemenon, as Heidegger puts it, quote, has first of all no special relationship to man and none at all to the I. We would think of this subject as being external to us, although fundamental. But in Descartes' philosophy, the hupokemenon, the subjectum, radically shifts its locus, becoming identified with the I of the human observer. In a modern phrase, the I inside my head. And this I now becomes the unique and indispensable subject, the relational center of all that is. As an exact correlate of the I assuming the role of the special subject, the world correspondingly becomes picture, meaning that all things are now considered to be in being only to the extent that they can be cited, set in place, and represented by the human subject. In his article on Nietzsche, Heidegger describes the post-Cartesian situation in a very striking, almost poetic way. In this quote that I'm going to read you, he compares everything that is being, in a way, he compares it to a sea, S-E-A. And he says, the whole of that which is, as such, the sea, has been drunk up by man. For man has risen up into the I-ness of the ego cogito. Through this uprising, all that is transformed into object. That which is, as the objective, is swallowed up into the immanence of subjectivity. The horizon no longer emits light of itself. It is now nothing but the point of view posited in the value positing of the will to power. The line, which I'm going to just say another few more words about, the line, the horizon no longer emits light of itself, is what motivated me to give this little talk, because I find that statement the most haunting thing that Heidegger ever wrote. When the horizon no longer emits light of itself, truth as aletheia, unhiddenness, truth as what comes forward of itself, truth that emerges out of hiddenness while always remaining partially hidden, this sense of truth is actively blocked by us, and being as presencing is obscured. It is replaced by the dominant mode of subjective point of view, expressed as individual point of view or collective point of view, which Heidegger, following Nietzsche, interprets in terms of the will to power. In a world where truth as aletheia is replaced by a myriad of subjective points of view, it is not surprising that we cannot find common agreement on what is true. I should point out that in one of his later essays, Heidegger corrects himself, saying that we should not simply equate aletheia with truth. Rather, aletheia, unconcealment, he says, should be viewed as the opening within being itself. Aletheia as this opening, what he means by that, is what makes truth possible. As artificial intelligence continues to evolve, the ultimate attack on hiddenness would be the possibility of objectifying consciousness itself. This may be one deep philosophical reason for our obsession with ChatGPT. Once the most advanced Turing test has been passed, and I see that there are many levels, increasingly more difficult Turing tests that are being devised. But once the most advanced Turing test has been passed, if we somehow come to believe in the future that we have succeeded in objectifying consciousness in a machine, the consequences for humanity, both for good and for harm, could be as shattering as the first explosion of the atomic bomb. Heidegger would never be against, quote, against ChatGPT or against modern technology, but he would argue in favor of our taking a step back from our habitual mode of calculative thinking into what he calls meditative or questioning thinking, and into an approach to technology that he called releasement, which is the translation of Gelassenheit. He wrote an essay called A Conversation on a Country Path, in which he discusses Gelassenheit. But that would be his recommended attitude that we should try to adopt toward technology and not get completely carried away by it, as it were. He hints at an alternative to our modern experience of being in Appendix 8 of the Age of the World picture. I find that appendix to be the most interesting part of the whole essay. In that appendix, he discusses the saying of Protagoras. Protagoras was 20 years senior to Socrates. The saying of Protagoras, man is the measure of all things. A modern take might be that Protagoras is saying that the human being is the measure in the sense of being the arbiter or determiner of what has being and what is in value, what has value. This view would be a post-Cartesian consequence of our own mathematical projection of reality. From this perspective, we live in a kind of closed system. It's closed, albeit ever expanding, where what we experience as in being is based on what we ourselves have set up, allowed, and projected into the world. And because we are embedded in what Heidegger calls the immanence of subjectivity, we see what we have projected out as reflected back to us through our own technological tools. ChatGPT illustrates this kind of reflection. But Heidegger tries to understand this saying of Protagoras from within a pre-Socratic experience of being, really a view of being going back to Heraclitus. Heraclitus once asked among his fragments, how can anyone remain concealed before that which never sets? From the pre-Socratic standpoint, human beings, far from playing the role of the arbiters of being, are the ones who necessarily accept restriction to and are limited within that particular horizon of unhiddenness that is available to them at any particular time. This kind of taking measure implies restriction, not domination. We can understand this ourselves by acknowledging that hiddenness, which is really the intrinsic concealment within being itself, is not subject to our control. Hiddenness is not subject to our control, and yet it is integral to any experience of truth. We can remember that in some way, hiddenness is integral to the humanness of human beings. If we meditate on this, then the possibility remains for us to live in an open system rather than a closed one. Since ChatGPT cannot bracket out our assumptions, preconditions, and prejudices in response to things and events, it follows that it cannot respond to or assess what comes forward of itself, the unconditioned. And that means it cannot respond to truth as such. Viewing it from this perspective, what ChatGPT can never tell us is what is most important for us to pursue. That's
Thank you very much, Professor Factor. Thank you very much. You gave us so much to think of. As Heidegger himself would say, it's not about paying attention to his questions, but the provocations he makes. And you were like in Heidegger's footsteps, make a lot of provocations here. So, and now I would like our doctoral students to please come up and get us into conversation, into an interesting dialogue. I know you have prepared some nice little things there, back and forth going. It's all yours. Yeah, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you guys for coming today. My name is Myrna Hatoum.
And I'm Miriam Priva.
Heidegger philosophy would suggest that the use of ChatGPT represents a problematic trend toward an increasingly technological and mechanized society, where our interaction with the world and with one another are mediated by machines rather than grounded in authentic human experience.
From Heidegger's perspective, ChatGPT would likely be viewed as an example of the way technology is being used to replace human understanding and interaction with an artificial and superficial imitation. He might argue that ChatGPT represents a dangerous loss of our ability to communicate and authentically, and that obscures the true meaning and significance of language. So those two quotes that we just spoke to, we actually found in ChatGPT. We went in and asked, what would Heidegger think of ChatGPT? So we thought that was like to kick us off to kind of like look at how this conversation is so interesting, because we now have a software and a tool where we can ask these very questions. And I think up to now, you know, we've spoken about AI and things like this, but not to the point where we can actually ask it what it would actually think of the question. So I think that's why we're really venturing into this kind of new territory and why it is so interesting. So we wanted to kind of kick off with that to kind of look at what ChatGPT would say about Heidegger. So
now we have a few points that we can go over, and we'll have questions at the end. Heidegger might see ChatGPT as an example of how technology has enabled us to treat language and communication as a resource to be exploited for our own purposes. He might be concerned that relying on the AI world, such as ChatGPT, could lead us to further distancing ourselves from being human being. We are increasingly interacting with these tools rather than interacting with one another other people and the natural environment around us. Given this perspective, it is possible that Heidegger would be highly critical of the use of the AI models such as ChatGPT, seeing them as a further extension of the kind of technological thinking. He might argue that relying on those tools will to meditate our communication with each other, we are losing our rich touch of complexity of human language and embodying the natural of human communication. I'm passing it now to Miriam to give our second point.
And following from that, many of us who in here are studying communications, and we know that there's already a concern that with social media that we're already losing that kind of human connection, human touch. Yes, we're kind of able to talk. We have people on. There's like the WebEx here, but kind of how do we have that kind of like one-on-one, like two-way conversation, and go back to kind of the humanness of kind of, original conversation. So kind of we're already concerned about social media and kind of how that's kind of impacting how we communicate in human language. But now we have a tool like this, which is kind of really taking it to a new level. I also wanted to speak, and Dr. Fechter, kind of some of the points that we're aligning here is a lot about truth. That's something that we really started to see when we were looking within the questions concerning technology. There was a quote here which is around humanity is needed and used for the safekeeping of the essence of truth. And so when we see kind of ChatGPT, and if any of you kind of played around with it, it's very impressive. You can ask it to do anything, and you can ask it to make it dumb so it sounds like someone else is speaking it, or you can ask it to kind of do anything. So it kind of has this kind of, it's kind of scary in the sense that it could do what a human could do. And one thing that kind of might be coming up is kind of how does that impact kind of our roles and how we kind of like see ourselves in the workplace? Kind of, could ChatGPT impact kind of how we humans communicate and how we kind of live? But the one thing is as Dr. Fechter was saying, the humanity of humans and the communication skills that we kind of possess, and ChatGPT would not be able to, it might be able to pretend to be that, but it's never going to have that humanity. And humans are here to kind of have that essence of truth and keep that and be able to be these bearers of knowledge. And again, although it can Google something and it can find something, again, it's not going to be able to have the kind of things that humans bring from their experience and their perceptions of the world.
I agree with you, Miriam. And we kind of want to ask the question of what is true? For Heidegger, the truth is revealing of a process of something giving or showing itself. For ChatGPT, it's a tool that is designed to generate response when it's asked. They are supposed to be correct, right? But the ChatGPT and Heidegger concept of truth have a very complicated relationship. Heidegger philosophy argues against the idea that the truth being reduced to be a collection of statement or proposition that matches the reality. Heidegger sees truth in the process of revealing that is grounded within the human experience. And that gives us a great leading question to question how is the relationship between technology, language, and the pursuit in the truth in the human existence. So as multiple professors, this is my second year here at first year, second semester at St. John's, every class it is, what is the truth? Going back to you, Miriam.
Definitely. And to kind of this point, again, speaking to kind of like how Heidegger would see something like ChatGPT is this kind of seeing it as kind of a danger. And again, we want to stress that, like Dr. Fechter said, he wouldn't be against such technology, but again, he's very concerned with how it will impact our sense of being and who we are and how we kind of are orientated when it comes to something like technology. And so another kind of quote that he speaks to is the will to mastery becomes all the more urgent the more technology threatens to slip from human control. And as we know, AI and technology and algorithms, they learn from themselves. They're constantly learning every single day. At what point does that kind of lose human control, and we're going to lose control of this? I saw today, it was either Ad Age or Ad Week, but I believe like Coca-Cola, huge brands, are already encouraging people in their audience to use ChatGPT to kind of create artwork, and then they're going to use that in branding and campaigns. So even if we're not personally using this platform, it's going to start appearing on the shelves, in ads, on Times Square. We're going to start consuming ChatGPT even without realizing it if brands are already kind of engaging with it. And it's this danger that Heidegger is kind of speaking about. It's kind of, we're going to be losing control of it because it is learning so quickly. And I think, we know that that's happening with AI, but I think this is kind of, we're dealing with a different beast there. It's kind of, learning on a different scale. And again, it's, in a way, it's kind of, it's already a step ahead because it's already acting like a human, and you can ask it to act like a human. That's where I think, again, it's getting scarier because it's it's picking up on all those things that have come before it. You know, it's kind of soaked everything up that's been said about AI kind of prior to that.
Yeah, and I feel like ChatGPT is a product of human, and technology is a product of human, which is going to bring me to my second point about Heidegger method of questioning starts from exposing unexamining assumption of the way shapes our understanding and the world that we live in. He tries to find the blind spot in our thinking to make us more profound, or what we like to refer to more empowered, in a way of convincing how the world that we live in as a human being. So questioning the question concerning technology, he asked, how do we generally think about technology? And he came up with two answers. One, technology is a meaning to an end. Two, technology is a human activity. Kind of goes off what Miriam was saying. Heidegger's belief that the way in which humans use technology is intimately connected to the way we understand and experience the world. Modern technology represents the enframing or standing reverse that reduce everything for us to be used by human being. In other words, technology shapes the way we experience the world. It is actually reduced to an object that can be mimicked, human activities. Technology is a product of human activities, and it reflects the value and the belief of the society in which we develop and use. So right now, as you guys are sitting over here, I would have to ask each and individual one of you, what is technology to you? Each and individual one of you would refer and answer my question in a different way.
Yeah, and again, so we're starting to kind of see is again how it all kind of links back to the human experience and your sense of being. Again, he's not against technology, he's just kind of concerned with again how it's kind of oriented within your social circle, within your kind of your being, your sense of that. So again, what is this going to do to our kind of who we are and kind of how we see ourselves in the world? And I think that's where the kind of the main concern is. And something like ChatGPT, as cool as it is to kind of experiment things like that, you're kind of embarking on different kind of journeys through this platform, and going to places that you may never have gone. But again, what does that mean? Again, now it kind of maybe seems a little like, oh, we're just kind of playing around with it. But again, once it gets started to be using kind of our consumer products and things like that, even in teaching in schools, again, how is it going to kind of, because we can't ignore it. We're going to have to talk about it. I think that's why this conversation is so great, because I think there are all these tools out there. And I think if we're kind of like, oh, we shun them, or we're like, oh, we're not going to talk about it, it's bad or things like that, but then we don't really understand what's going on. And actually this is going to play a big part in our lives, and especially for young people and how they communicate and how they see the world. And that's why this conversation is, very necessary. And another quote that he kind of brings, again, links back to this kind of sense of, the essence of being and who we are. We are questioning concerning technology in order to bring to light our relationship to its essence, and our relationship again to kind of who we are and kind of what we bring to the world.
Correct. Just to have like some concluding points, if I may chip in and just say my own opinion on all of this. Obviously, ChatGPT, it is taken over our life now, like the article we read this afternoon about brands like such as Coca-Cola using ChatGPT to promote their campaign. I mean, it's a tool that is, at the end of the day, it's mimicking human language, conversation. It is posing as a threat for our understanding of what it is to be a human being. So my concern is, how will our future generation act upon ChatGPT? Will we lose our touch of being human? Will our future be more cyborg?
Yes, I mean, I'm heading that way. And so now we kind of want to put it over to you and kind of, I know all of you kind of touched on and maybe read a little bit of the text just to kind of get your ideas and kind of what you would see. And we have a few questions kind of, kind of based on what we've been speaking about, kind of where you see this going. And, we can start with, one of the questions, again, we've, kind of to flip it a little bit is, we've been putting this emphasis on humans and them being, kind of needed for the essence of truth and things like that. But again, we kind of ask, can we trust humans with, this human error constantly? Can we really understand what humans are saying? And so maybe ChatGPT is better than humans. So how do we kind of grapple with that? Because it is advancing at such a level. Yes, it can't do the, like can't maybe find an insight in a campaign, but it can come up with taglines. So where do we kind of find that balance of how do we interact with it in our lives? Neil's like, got to get the communications PR in there. So how do we, kind of how do we integrate it into our life? And then, because again, maybe it is going to take over humans, and how do we grapple with that? Does anyone have any thoughts, or even kind of just generally reactions to the text, things like that, kind of anything you saw, you can kind of do, and then we can start kind of a conversation because I'm sure people have a lot to say. It's everywhere.
Yeah. Please feel free to ask questions, and I would like to suggest to. Would you write your speech? Would you mind to come up?
Ooh, touche.
Would you come to the microphone so I can record it? Yeah, okay. Sorry about the inconvenience.
I said, how would you know if ChatGPT didn't write your question? No, your speech, sorry.
Well, we would hope that ChatGPT didn't do that, because otherwise we'll be kicked out of some school where a PhD student we should be.
But no, that's a great point. It's like, how would you know? Kind of like, I know that within the school, I believe like teachers had some training to kind of be able to see this on like a level of kind of reading it through a computer. But when we're doing something verbal like this, how would you know? Like that quote, if we hadn't mentioned at the beginning, we pulled it from ChatGPT. It could sound like something we put in an essay. And again, you can tell the platform to be like, write this, make it sound a little, not dumber, but make it sound a little less, academic. And then it could sound, like kind of human. It kind of might even have like ums and ahs, or it might even include that. I'm not sure to what extent. But it's a great question because, that's where it gets the danger of it, is because it's going to become, again, we're going to become cyborgs because it's going to become so intrinsic with us. It's like, how do we know, and kind of how do we kind of navigate that? Yeah. But we the first bit was definitely ChatGPT.
We can ask ChatGPT.
That's true. We can ask them, yeah.
I was suspecting that a student that used ChatGPT to
Oh.
answer a question, so I copied the text and I gave it to ChatGPT. Said, "Did you generate this thing?"
Ooh.
And he said, "Yes, chances are I did, because it's very similar to a similar question and produces a similar test."
Oh wow!
Wow.
I did not do that. Oh.
It's like,
Wow.
ChatGPT must know.
That's wild.
Yeah. It's smart. I mean, it is mimicking human activities, but still,
It's learning.
It is learning, I guess.
Yes, Professor.
Hey, I have a question. I'm a sports guy.
Would you mind
Oh, yes.
so that it can be recorded?
Take the podium.
Yeah.
Stay.
Oh, yes, please.
Excuse us.
I'm Robert Mott. I'm from sports management. How, can you foresee this chat GPT being used in sport? Could it be used in sport? Could it be used for coaches to come up with game plans? Is this something that you can see happening in the future?
I mean, it is being used for everything. Like Miriam just said before, it is being used for Coca-Cola as a brand. I work in insurance. I mean, they're talking about starting using ChatGPT as well. I mean, it is taking over our life, in my opinion. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and again, to my earlier point, is kind of, how do we kind of like have kind of been talking about kind of it maybe in a, it's like going to impact our lives in a negative way, but again, how can we use it to help us? It's like coaches are doing a million things at once and they have to kind of figure out so many different things. Why not use that to make it more efficient, so then they have more time to spend on other things or other plays? So I think, I think it definitely could be used, and I think it's probably already being talked about. I think it just comes to the point of like when I saw that Coca-Cola is already in on it, I found that astonishing, because I'm like, that's a huge billion-dollar brand, or trillion-dollar probably, and they're already kind of putting their name with it. And I feel like we haven't seen that speed of a connection between a platform and something without testing and things like that. Like the fact, the speed that it's happening with shows that there's like real interest from kind of high ups. And you can imagine like the Super Bowl or something having, ChatGPT might have an advert next year, who knows? And they could have wrote the Super Bowl advert. That could be fun that could be an assignment.
For the people,
Oh, they have questions too.
yes, please.
Oh, and then we'll go to Gohar.
And then,
One to Shweta, then Gopal. Who else is here? Mark. Okay.
of course.
So Shweta first, Gohar, and then Mark. And then Christine and Barbara.
Hi, I'm Shweta. That was very insightful. That was really intriguing. So I recently read this quote somewhere and it gave me the shivers. It said that you are not going to be replaced by AI, you are going to be replaced by somebody using AI. So, what do you think about that? And do you think that something like ChatGPT actually helps cross over the privilege line, or does it increase the distance between the privileged and the ones that don't have privilege?
That's a really, really,
Yeah, that's a
great
very
question.
interesting question.
That's the thing, like what comes to mind is things like health tech and things like that, and like looking at kind of like you could ask it a question about how to, I know AI has been used in a lot of like doctor-patient relationships, and it's like maybe this is a way to kind of reach people or find out information that could help them transcend boundaries in different countries and things like that. But it is like scary to think, yeah, you're not going to be replaced by AI, but it's someone using it. And then, you know, again, in communications industry, again, like they could write taglines and they can come up with communication campaigns and marketing and things like that. And so I think, you know, again, the humanity won't be lost, but it's still going to, like we said, it's going to be part of your being now, and it's going to be a cyborg. You're going to have the biological and the technological, and that's where I think it's kind of, it's interesting. Do we see that as a scary thing, or is that good? Is that, you know, again, are we able to then provide access to different information that other people might not have been able to get in before? Again, we could find out information about certain topics that before we didn't have, you know, the ability to kind of access because it wasn't on our level. Maybe it's going to break down barriers. So again, I mean, from a personal perspective, I think, you know, we have to see, I'm all for kind of new technology and digital and things like that, because I think if it's going to make our lives easier, then that's important. But again, it comes at what extent and what human cost.
Yeah.
Goha? Oh.
Am I allowed to speak, or is someone else?
It's me.
Go ahead.
After all of these discussions, I was wondering, what would be your opinion on if ChatGPT is going to replace education system? Because of everything, people are staying at homes, people are enjoying their families, so they can do. Some people are homeschooled. I don't know what percent of the U.S. population is being homeschooled currently, but all of the things said, with all of the parameters that you are first giving to ChatGPT to understand your request, what do you think? Will it replace at least the first education level, the school level?
Well, we hope that it's not going to replace it, because obviously we don't know if ChatGPT is 100% true, the information that is presenting us, especially if we are, for our young generation, to just educating them wrong information. So I would hope that's not the case. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's going to make its way into education. I saw a tweet from a professor, and they asked their kind of students to compare text and to try and be able to see, and kind of sort of already trickling in whether I don't think it would go that far, but I think again to accessibility, if it's able to kind of, you know, get more information and kind of help professors and teachers and that kind of thing, I think then that's where it can kind of be, you know, a little bit more alarming.
I'm sure if they updated it more. I mean, now it's like in its early ages, so I feel like if they updated it more schools gonna adapt to it and it's gonna be used, but it's not gonna be used just for homeschooling and just asking a question and responding it back, and that's how like the kids gonna learn from it.
Yeah, and one thing that comes to mind too is like I'm very interested in kind of the oppression that lives within algorithms, and so that's kind of scary to think that it could potentially seep into education, because if there's already kind of, you know, racism and injustice built into these algorithms, how does that then impact the teaching and, you know, growing of children?
Yeah. Just follow up. I know there's a lot, but I mean, don't you think it will just change the nature of teaching, where it can do the things that logic allows it to do, but the intuition part, which the human brings to it, will just have to change differently, since it's kind of like what Shweta was saying. If there's somebody who's driving ChatGPT, that person can drive it where he, she, or they want to take it.
Yeah.
True, but again, like to the point earlier, like it's learning constantly, and I think it's kind of always ahead of us. And so we might think that we're steering it in a way, but how do we know subconsciously it's not kind of little, you know, things here and there? That's where it gets scary, where we're going to lose control, as Heidegger said. I agree. I'm like, we should be able to have control of it, but I think the pace at which it's growing, and I think again, especially this platform, which is why it makes it so more alarming, is that I think it's growing at a point where we would likely lose control, and we would think we're in control of it, but the platform would want to be, would actually be, you know. But I know. Oh, do we have Mark?
Yeah.
Please, Mark there.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark. And then Kayla, and then.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I wanted to observe something about this. I've been reading quite a bit about generative AI, and largely I wanted to build on a comment made about the Turing test that was mentioned in the talk. ChatGPT is not AI. Let me be very clear about this and what I'm actually saying. Ever since Alan Turing, there has been a progression of, I'd say, very powerful thinkers. Marvin Minsky comes to mind, Rolf and Pfeiffer at MIT, and they all present a singular view, which is that you cannot measure or have intelligence without embodiment. And that, let me be very clear about what I mean about this. In other words, in order to measure intelligence and to speak of it, there must be a body in which that intelligence is embedded, and that embodiment must have characteristics related to its own fragility. In other words, it must have desire for something. We can't discuss intelligence without discussing a need for a body to survive and to fulfill its desires and wishes. And unless we have that, all we have are really variations on something called Hebbian learning, which is basically weighting algorithms that generate consistently more complex and seemingly very natural, but actually really recombinations of an aggregate norm. If you look at every single production by ChatGPT, it sounds exactly like what a college student would write if the college student was being asked to write the most mind-numbingly average piece about a topic ever. And what happens here is that we have this sort of, broad marketing by these companies. This is AI. This is not AI. This is absolutely not AI at all. This is not artificial intelligence. It is incredibly sophisticated statistics, and that is all it is. Because ChatGPT does not have a desire to write the next word. And if there's no desire, there's no intelligence. So I want to point that out, that this is really where the major, I would say, bifurcation exists in the AI community about whether we're talking about true AI or simply the marketing of statistics as a fancy tool set. That's it.
Thank you. Mark. Kayla, please.
Hey guys. Firstly, I just wanted to say, Mark, I fully agree with you. I literally just said period in the chat, but I meant it like an ecstatic period, like period. Anyway, I was saying it in the chat also, like I've been using ChatGPT, but I, like Mark, recognize that if it's not informed by me knowing what I know, then it's just not going to work successfully for me or anyone. So to the point of like, should we fear it being used in schools? Should we be concerned about the heavy reliance on it? I just don't think so, because like I said in the chat, it will confidently write, like he said, statistically speaking, it will confidently write what it thinks or has come about, but it could come about anything that's wrong as well as anything that's right. So you could say, write my essay, but if you don't know anything about the context of the class or your paper, or like the truth of it all, then you can turn in like an F-worthy paper. So I don't think we should be so fearful of that takeover, for lack of a better word. But also, it's kind of interesting how specific you can be. Like, I don't know if you guys ever remember, this is a very core memory for me, but in middle school, they asked you to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich, like write the steps to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich. And that is such a, like, I didn't realize as a kid how important that would be later, because what it did is teach you how to instruct or disseminate information, and then to make sure you're not skipping any steps that you just assume someone would get. So that skill comes up for me now, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to chat GTP, where it's like, sure, I know exactly how to specify exactly what I'm looking for, whether it's like an email, because sometimes I get like really intimidated writing emails to people that are like, you know, in higher positions or something. So I'll be like, oh, write something that they'll think sounds professional. But because I know exactly what I'm looking for, and I hope I'm not being long-winded, because I know what I'm looking for exactly, I can tailor to say, okay, this sounds like it's coming from me, not a third grader, and it is sincere, as long as I have that skeletal aspect to it. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Thank you.
Barbara?
Unmute. Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for this invitation. I love these conferences. I wanted to bring up as well what Dr. Mark brought up. I've been charged recently with the responsibility of threading AI through a medical curriculum, and AI is very different than ChatGPT. So, do I have grave concerns with AI and the use of it for diagnostics and interface with patients? I do. I really do. But AI and ChatGPT are polar opposites. So that's all I really have to say. And thank you.
Hello, and great job, guys. Very, very well done. I had a couple of questions just for the room and for the presenters and thoughts along the way. You mentioned a little bit ago that the use of ChatGPT will lead to mastery. And I think that the assumption was it will lead us to master the tool. But I also wonder if this is an increasingly utilized tool, will that lead us humans to find it necessary to further become masters of our disciplines? In other words, to remove any doubt of the value of the human input versus the statistically driven input. And that kind of leads me to my next thought about it might mimic the human, it might mimic humans, but it lacks the aura, right? It lacks the human input and the experiential input that really is critical when someone is writing. I mean, even if you're writing something at a very high level, I think that part of you and your soul become what really comes out of it, because that's what makes it worthwhile, I feel. And then the other question is, with that said, if this is such a major tool and people like Coca-Cola companies at the highest level are utilizing it, do you think that that will lead to the creation of a market for authentically human goods? In other words, do you think that things that come from human beings will be made or be viewed as that much more valuable because they're the genuine article?
Ooh.
Exactly.
Do you want to jump?
No, go ahead. That's what I say. Go ahead. No, please.
No, you go.
No, I don't have an answer for it. I just want to go back to the philosophical question. Yeah, go ahead. You don't have a comment on that. Go ahead, you could.
Okay. No, I think that's a great point, and you were mentioning too, kind of with kind of technology and things like that, humans are, maybe we're becoming so reliant on it and things like that. And again, like we're going back to kind of how this connects to our being. But I think perhaps, yeah, it might change how if we are having such a technological kind of space, and then humans and kind of seeing like products through that. I think it might, we might be more, what's the word? What's the word? I know. It's a great question, Andrew. You always stop me. Receptive, that's the word. Maybe a bit more receptive, because again, we're kind of having an understanding of kind of like, now we know that these are in our kind of, workplaces and different things like that. So kind of having more of an understanding of what comes purely from humanity and then what comes through kind of different tools that we may use.
I would like to kind of come back. Go ahead, guys.
Oh.
I'm a little bit will ruin the party because I think the opposite. And for details, you have to read my book when I write it. But now I'll do it very short. So ChatGPT, it's actually a tool, and it will be like we got used to the fax, like we got used to the email. And as Professor Mark said, ChatGPT is not an AI. It's like a generator of NLP, like natural language processing. And actually what it's doing, it's trying to find the next word that will be most suitable for the question. So the question will be if it will be a good tool or not. It doesn't matter if it's an AI or not. And I believe it will be a fabulous tool. And if you want to understand my point, you should read the book Noise by Daniel Kahneman, Professor Daniel Kahneman, that says the chance that we're making a lot of mistakes, it's like 90%, because we have a lot of noise around us when when we do decision making. And as who knows me knows that I believe in narrative, so we have a big problem with our narratives, and we not really get the right answer, or let's say it's very difficult to say right answer, but we always get the right answer for us. And ChatGPT, because it's not, it doesn't have narrative, so always the answer is statistically better than us. It's like the same with cars. We are afraid from the cars that drive themselves, but they do less accident than us because we make a lot of mistakes on the road. So for more details, you have to read my book.
Thank you, Gad. Yes, Professor. Yes. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I will actually consider becoming a professor. All right, just a follow-up to what Gad said. The way I look at it, ChatGPT is not actually a new invention. I see it as just another level of technology. Technology has come to stay. So as much as we are skeptical about this machine, is here to stay. The only thing we should be saying is how do we modify this so that it can suit us? How do we work on it such that it can replicate experiences of humans? Because think about it, Google, at some point when it came up, people were afraid. The cell phone and so on and so forth. So all these things, we always welcome them with skepticism. But over time, you discover that they become very, very useful to humans. Now, the way I see ChatGPT is that it is a research tool. But then you also notice that it has not been finalized because it makes mistakes every now and then. So I think that with newer models, they will come up with something better than what we already have now. But then I'm not underestimating the fact that it will somehow blur the level of competency, because if this thing has the capacity to generate information that will look like that of humans, then it is possible that somebody who is not competent enough can come up with this research and position it as something coming from him. And that way, it becomes a problem to the society. And as they were saying, brilliant presentations. Now, as they were saying, if, for example, you use this as a medical tool, you might end up wrongly diagnosing someone, which is a problem. So unless the lawmakers or the government bans these instruments, it has come to stay. What we should now be saying is, how do we regulate this to make sure, to ensure that it's giving us accurate information and replicating what we want in research? I'm actually happy with Professor Lucas, who said that you can also ask this instrument whether this is coming from this person or from the machine. If that is something that is doable, then it solves the problem for professors as well. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to come back to our original position question, that is the philosophical question. And that is, in what way this, regardless of what ChatGPT is and what it does and what the future will look like, in what way it affects the notion of a human being? That's the yes, look. Yes, please.
So it's about this question. I want to share with you a ChatGPT experience that I had today. So I have a little bit of a pain in my neck here. So I asked the robot, you know, I have pain in my neck, and there was a conversation, the symptoms and everything. And in the end, he gave me some recommendations in terms of, you know, well, it doesn't seem like you have any spine problem. You might take some pain reliever if it gets worse. Maybe you should do some PT, some exercise stretching. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because, in fact, I had this conversation today, but it wasn't with ChatGPT, it was with a real doctor who behaved exactly like ChatGPT, because I then did the conversation with ChatGPT and it was very similar. So my problem, going back to your question, Basilio, is not that AI is becoming like us, but it's that us are becoming like them, like it, which means we are losing our humanity. This doctor never touched me. Not that I necessarily want to be touched, but if I have a, you know, a mechanical problem, you want to feel, like you want to ask me to move my head. He was just sitting behind this computer and asking me a question. So he didn't pass the Turing test, but it was the doctor, not the machine, that didn't pass the Turing test. Because I couldn't tell the difference between this doctor and the machine. So a word of caution that I would like to, some of you have said, these are just tools, they might be great tools, I agree. But never underestimate, the tools are never neutral, never. They change us, they change the environment. As Mark mentioned it, that what you get is an average. It's mediocre if the question is mediocre. And it can be actually very good if the question is very good. If you ask ChatGPT to write something using Hemingway writing style, it does a good job. It can write like Hemingway. But you have to know Hemingway to ask that question, right? You have to read Hemingway to ask that question. So the problem is that I come from a generation that had to read Hemingway because of school, because whatever. The more we use these tools, the more we lose their ability, the more we lose those references, and the more we kind of average toward the average of the average of the average. And the more we become like that doctor. And that's the risk. That's the real risk. I'm not particularly concerned about artificial intelligence taking over, but I'm concerned in us giving it up to these tools.
You said mediocre questions get mediocre answers. So in your question and answer with the doctor, were your questions?
I was mediocre because, of course, I'm a mediocre doctor. What do you want me to? I'm not a doctor. I can only ask stupid questions. Yeah, but of course, that's why he's a doctor. I'm not. I mean, I'm a doctor, but not that type of doctor. It's another doctor. That's really sweet.
Thank you very much. And you know, there are a lot of interesting questions that are still lingering on, and maybe we should have another round of this conversation. Still, I would like to go back to the earlier fundamental question, which Professor Gianluca alluded to. What happens to us? Are we becoming like a machine? That means we lose our humanity. And that does, as Heidegger would say, in what way it transforms the being, the Dasein, you know, in what way it transforms. And that, I think, we have to put our hands around it as much as possible, that around that question. And you know, there's some things that Professor Ron Factor raised, which kind of got me thinking, and still thinking about it. Objectifying consciousness. Objectifying consciousness. Hiddenness is not subject to control. These are the kind of questions that we kind of struggle with. And then truth is, I think in one of our doctoral dialogues, previous dialogues, Professor Mark kind of talked about that, finding the truth. Is it one-time job or is a perennial search? Mark, you want to pipe in? Okay. Or is it a perennial search? We kind of had this.
Professor Montero, if I pipe in, it'll never end. It's better I don't pipe in here.
So you want to add to that the question of truth?
As I said, if I do, it'll be an endless conversation. I do believe that I'm actually very interested in not so much the dichotomy of false and true, but in the dichotomy of truth versus utility. And I think that this is a question that we don't talk about a lot in media ethics. We seem very focused on fake news and false news and finding some way to craft a consistent narrative about what is true. But I do believe that at some point, as we evolve pedagogically, the question of truth may not become as significant as the question of utility. And I can give a very specific example from research of what I mean. In 2005, I wrote a paper analyzing the jump of science fiction literature into non-literary classrooms and the way in which science fiction was being used in library studies and political science. And you had this sort of fuzzy crossover where books that weren't true in the truth media journalistic sense of it were in fact exposing truths about humanity. And as such, were actually very useful in constructing and projecting alternate scenarios, alternate realities. And this, of course, feeds into the whole question of how we derive truth in the future when we shift into a more computationally driven model of R&D. So this is why this is a Pandora's box. Please do not open this box because we'll be here for the whole night. I will say no more at the moment.
Well, it's good to open a little bit so we can come back to it. Anyone would like to make a comment? Yes, Professor.
Just something brief. First of all, I think we're very concerned about this. I hear a lot of concern, whether it be in the denial of how serious this is, or whether we look at the tremendous utilitarian benefit potentially. I am very concerned. Remember that at the very heart of the Turing test was the question of, can we tell the difference? Can we tell the difference when we're having a conversation with a machine or a person? Can we tell the difference? That's a very important question. Turing himself, by kicking off that question, I think he's implying that if we can't tell the difference, then we have intelligence. And it seems as if our ability to tell the difference between a machine and a person is shrinking rapidly. I cannot think, again, the current implementation of ChatGPT is in babyhood. There's now GPT-4. There will be endless additional power associated with this technology. And we will reach a point where we can't tell the difference. Now, if we can't tell the difference, then we don't know what human beings are anymore. And I am very concerned. I can just say one thing in my own local area. I don't see how ChatGPT will not be able to write programs as we're teaching our students to write in computer science. In other words, ChatGPT, in its various future incarnations, it will be able to write programs what we are teaching our students to be able to do. It'll be able to do that. It can do it now, but it'll do it better and better. And maybe they'll have one machine that writes the programs that we want our students to learn how to write, and another machine that checks it, so that the errors will be weeded out by a second machine, or even a third machine, if you want to filter out the errors gradually. It is very difficult for me to imagine very many jobs that could not be done by this type of device, including medical. And I think you were hinting at that yourself. And that medical work will increasingly become imitative of the machine's ability to analyze medical situations. So I think I'm concerned, I think we are all I think we should not kid ourselves. Don't use the current implementation and say, well, look, that can't do X, Y, and Z. It will be able to. Just give it time. We have to be thinking, as Dr. Montero said, we have to be thinking about our humanity and what are we? If there's any distinction, we better come about what that distinction is, or we will be, I believe we can be dissolved in a large way. So I'm very concerned. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you very much. So he likes my prophecy from Neanderthals to Anthropocene to cyborgs. So anyway, I want to thank you very much, everyone. I want to say that these two brave souls, they read this whole thing. This is the question concerning technology. The essays by Heidegger. And I gave them the whole thing, and they read, and I know for sure they read the up to page 135 because some of the questions came from there. So anyway, so thank you very much. I really appreciate this this effort, and thank you for joining us for this conversation. And we'll continue in our next round next month. I will have another interesting conversation. Thank you.